Well, joining me live at the desk here is the Assistant Trade Minister and the Assistant Minister for a Future Made in Australia, Tim Ayres. Thanks very much for your time.
G'day, Andrew.
The PM told caucus last week then the government has a big second-term agenda, and he's spoken subsequently about childcare, education, medicare being part of that, and a Future Made in Australia, your portfolio. Are you confident this agenda is enough to win the next election? And isn't there a bit of a concern here that the government is all about big government taking over the economy?
Well, can I take that in two parts? Firstly, yes, all of the elements that the Prime Minister talked about in the caucus and subsequently are clearly part of an ambitious second-term agenda for the Albanese government. We are proud of what we have achieved so far in a short amount of time in government. Big challenges for Australia. Big challenges in cost of living questions, big challenges for the future as well. Areas like the security challenges that you just traversed in the introduction, Future Made in Australia, a range of these issues focused on making Australia a more prosperous, peaceful place where our future security is assured. Those kind of issues will be squarely on the government's agenda. Deepening the arrangements around Medicare, early childhood education and childcare. These are big productivity reforms for the future of the economy. We're pleased with the progress that we've made on some of the here and now questions around cost of living in particular. The inflation's halved since we took office. We have approached these questions. You can see Peter Dutton and Angus Taylor's approach to this, massive spending cuts for government, $315 billion spending cuts for government. That's what they forecast. They're a little bit slippery about where. I won't say whether it's indexation of the age pension or other government programs, very slippery about detail.
They talk about lower tax though. Yeah, you talk about more spending.
Well, so it's interesting, isn't it? They talk in generalities, but not a single costed policy. $315 billion in cuts, where cuts to programs are in their DNA.
I'm not sure they've committed to that much in terms of cuts, but
that's exactly what they said, and then they shift away.
Well, that's what they said. They've criticised various spending policies of yours to that extent.
Well, of course they do, but they don't say what they do differently.
Let me get on the government's agenda though. Look, universal childcare. Are we moving closer to that? Well, probably never get to that. Is that one of the sort of promises?
Well, the Prime Minister's made it really clear that is the direction that we're headed in, and the reforms that we've engaged in so far, driving down childcare costs for all Australians. At the same time, lifting childcare wages so we deal with some of the workforce participation challenges in childcare itself, but broadening access for working mums and dads in childcare. It's good for childcare workers, it's good for kids, but it's also critically what sits underneath these reforms is it's good for productivity and workforce participation in the economy.
What more can be done about Medicare? What's the plan for Medicare?
Well, you've seen what the government's done so far this term. 57 new Medicare urgent care clinics spread right across Australia, not allocated in some colour-coded spreadsheet like the previous government. Made all of these spending commitments on the basis of what it thought was in its partisan interest, spread right across. I was in Tamworth in Barnaby Joyce's electorate just a few months ago, inspecting the urgent care clinic there. It's making a big difference for Tamworth working families being able to get access inside and outside working hours when something goes wrong for their kids in particular.
So it's around that space, do you think?
Well, there'll certainly be more to say about Medicare, but I just point to that as one of the things that we said that we would do, we have done, spread right across the economy, and it's delivering real benefits for working families now.
How much is Future Made in Australia policy part of that agenda? And what more is there to occur in that space? And can you tell our viewers what it's all about? Because it's just this vague concept at the moment around getting manufacturing back here, but it seems to have a real renewable energy emphasis.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It's a good opportunity to explain what is the rationale for this. Of course, we have been talking about what the benefits are for outer suburban workers and families and for regional Australia. That is where the benefits of Future Made in Australia will go. That's where the investment will go. I'd really point to three big driving national interest arguments here. Firstly, the national security and economic resilience. Sitting there right in the national interest framework. Number one, national security and economic resilience. We can't take our place in this region with the challenging geopolitics and security issues. We can't take it for granted.
So that's defence industry building, is it?
Well, this is building the industry capabilities that we need for the future. Not just in defence. There is, of course, an already existing framework for attracting key investments in defence and defence materials. This goes to some of those broader areas of industry capability. The idea that we could navigate our way through the next 2 or 3 decades in what is a challenging environment for Australia with the same complacency that typified the Abbott, Morrison, Turnbull governments. You know, we're just sitting on our hands and allowing industrial capability to flow offshore. That is not the approach of this government. So there is, number one, national security, economic resilience. Number two, what is our future comparative advantage here, and making sure that we get there and land these investments. And we have the world's best solar and wind resources. We have all of the minerals that our trading partners are going to require. Now, Australia has the world's best mining technology. We have the best mining services and mining processes, but we have a bit more ambition for Australia than just shipping raw products offshore. And that means using our resources to process minerals here in Australia. And thirdly, it's a competitive argument. We've seen the United States move on the Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah. We've seen economies all over the world adjust and respond. This is Australia's competitive response to make sure that we are at the top table with the world's best manufacturers and the investment community to invest here in Australia.
That IRA title's seen a bit of a smokescreen, for basically code for investing in renewable energy, right?
It's changed the dynamics.
Is that what Future Made in Australia is?
It's changed the dynamics in the global economy. That's the truth. In investment,
what happens if Trump gets elected?
Well, I think that some of the fundamentals are going to remain the same. You can see the European Union, the Canadians, the Japanese, the Koreans are all moving on making sure that they've got the industrial capability to meet these future challenges, including the shift to net zero. Now, people should understand 97% of our trading partners have committed to that giant industrial transformation that is required on the shift to net zero. There are enormous risks and opportunities for Australia. The risk is if we do nothing, the train only leaves the station once. All right. Opportunity gets passed up and we would be poorer and less productive.
Well, let's talk about where the legislation is at.
Yeah.
Which is, you Assistant Minister for Future Made in Australia. Is there a Future Made in Australia if that legislation never gets through the Senate?
Well, the government's going to keep pressing on with both the legislation and the initiatives that we announced in the budget. The bulk, the $22.7 billion worth of production tax credits, which essentially mean that if you, for example, manufacture a kilogram of hydrogen in a manufacturing facility in Australia, you will get a tax credit for it. It rewards success. It's not sending grants or Commonwealth support to companies that might manufacture in Australia. If you manufacture green iron in Australia, you will get support in terms of tax credits from the government. That's there. This Future Made in Australia framework is the legislation that's in the Parliament should be supported by every member of Parliament.
But you can get ahead with the program without the legislation.
We will press ahead. What the legislation does is apply rigour to future government decision making. And what we've got is an alliance between Peter Dutton and Adam Bandt to frustrate a Future Made in Australia.
Because you've had criticism, including the Australian Industry Group saying they're vague guidelines around the community benefit principle by which projects would be eligible for this.
Well, there's certainly very clear guidelines in terms of the national interest framework, which sets some rigour around future decision making, makes it really clear what these are for. There are community benefit principles, I think uncontroversial, but say that when investments occur in regional Australia, in Gladstone or Central Queensland or the Hunter Valley or the Latrobe Valley or the Upper Spencer Gulf, that they should deliver benefit to supply chain businesses, for example. These are uncontroversial propositions, but what's really happening here is it's the politics of no, where people who have been voting Liberal all their lives, haven't been able to break the habit of a lifetime and voting Liberal, good people don't realise that what they've done is elected Adam Band, and people who are Greens voters, who are progressive voters who voted Green, don't realise that what they're getting is Peter Dutton, and the Greens and Peter Dutton and David Littleproud and Barnaby Joyce have decided to put the partisan interest before the country interest.
You could get a lot more blockage after the next election, the way the polls are looking. But let me talk to you about election timing. Do you see this government producing another budget?
Well, there's a budget scheduled for March. You can see it there in the parliamentary calendar. The Prime Minister said that there'll be an election in the first half of 2025. Election timing's a matter, as you know, Andrew, for Prime Ministers, not for Assistant Ministers for Trade. And he will make his mind up at the right time for an election that happens in March, April, May through next year. Any month. I
thought you were just going to leave it at March there for a minute.
No. But I mean, there's been some pretty feverish speculation about this because we released the parliamentary calendar in October. Now, that is something that we've said that we want to do, is bring out the parliamentary calendars early, because we're a predictable, stable government that's focused on governing in the national interest and providing a bit of predictability and good order. We've released the parliamentary calendar. That's a good thing, gives people a bit of clarity about next year. It adds nothing to what the Prime Minister or the government said about election time.
Tomorrow's a year since the Voice referendum, not something the government wants to mark, really, is it?
Well, it was a referendum that we undertook to the Australian people that we would do. Yeah, we said very clearly in the lead up to the election.
Megan Davis said you should never have held it once you knew the referendum was going to be lost. What do you make of that?
Well, we are a government that does what we said we were going to do. I think that's what Australians want. Now, we held the referendum. It's not like we held the referendum and sat on our hands. We held the referendum and argued the case for constitutional change. We did it very vigorously. We respect the result that we got. And there is a lot of work to do.
Was that a wasted year, though, in the term, talking about that for most of the year?
I think a government that does what it says it's going to do is something that Australians should value and understand. That is the approach that Anthony Albanese is taking to these questions. That there's a difference. We've seen what happened in governments chopping and changing in terms of policy direction, in terms of investor confidence in the community, in terms of the community itself having respect for democratic institutions. One of the things you have to do is do what you say you're going to do and explain your way through these challenges. That's what the government's done. Now, the counterfactual is a government that, when something's hard, runs away from it. That is not what this government's doing. Now, we respect the result that we got. There is a lot of work to do in closing the gap, and the Prime Minister spelt out some of the direction there. We've got a minister who's...
You've known Anthony Albanese for a long time, been one of his allies. Do you think he could get better at the communication game?
I think he's a very good communicator. This is a challenging period for governments all around the world. Complex security and economic challenges and change coming at governments around the world fast. And what Australians need to see is a bloke who's one of them, communicating in a common sense, practical way. He does that every day of his life. I'm proud of the way that he's approached the big challenge of being the Prime Minister of Australia. I was really proud of the way that he approached building the Labor Party over the course of what was a pretty difficult 3 years of opposition for Labor and for the country. He built a different kind of opposition. Remember, during that COVID period, the Morrison government's COVID response wasn't something that the Labor Party designed, but we supported it. We supported it even though we would not have designed it ourselves because it was in the national interest. It was open to Labor to take a carping oppositionist approach. We didn't do that in opposition. We've built government in the national interest, not the partisan interest over our period in government. It's a complete contrast to the arrogance, divisiveness and anger that has characterised Peter Dutton's period as the opposition leader. Australians voted for a different kind of government.
Say, but last week you had the Prime Minister accusing Angus Taylor of having Tourette's syndrome, which he had to apologise for. The government found itself unable to reach agreement with the opposition on a motion condemning the October 7 attacks in Israel. Then there was this press conference by the Chief of Staff to Richard Marles where she said she was sidelined from the Deputy PM's office, an extraordinary allegation. What can you tell us about all of this? As some of the Brittany Higgins campaign that you mounted, the chickens come home to roost on that.
Well, can we work our way through those three questions? Number one, of course, the Prime Minister's like any other Australian. He said something in the heat of parliamentary debate. He didn't have to be dragged to a withdrawal and
Scott
apology.
Morrison said that, you'd be all over it.
He didn't have to be dragged to a withdrawal and apology. He got up on his feet straight away without being asked and said, basically, I've got this wrong. Then he came back again to make sure that he was, he recognised, he wished he hadn't said it. He was very clear about it straight away. Not like these mealy-mouthed apologies that you saw Scott Morrison dragged to, where he'd have to be dragged kicking and screaming and he'd say words to the effect of, I'm sorry you felt bad about that. He's a genuine bloke who responded genuinely when he said something that he knew he shouldn't have said.
October 7.
October 7, deeply disappointing that you saw the opposition and the Greens together in the Senate, Andrew. Opposition and the Greens voted against a two-state solution. But this is a significant break from bipartisanship.
Didn't there need to be a motion
questions.
just about those appalling attacks? What was wrong with just having a motion just about those appalling attacks?
The October 7 on Monday, the Prime Minister, and to his credit, the opposition leader, figures across the government were out there with the Australian Jewish community, making it absolutely clear where the government stood on what has to be said over and over again is that it is the most reprehensible, abominable thing that I've seen happen in a conflict overseas. It was a revolting display.
So why couldn't it have its own motion?
Well, what happened...
Because the pressure of the vote in Western Sydney?
See, bipartisanship matters. It matters because it's a national...
Your boss had an opportunity for bipartisanship, I guess.
Andrew, we are the government. And what the government did on Tuesday was set out a motion that, yes, dealt exhaustively with October 7 and also set out what the government's approach to these questions is.
All right.
Now, the opposition chose to hang out with Adam Band, their supposed opponents, the two extremes of Australian politics coming together to vote against a two-state solution.
What about this, Richard?
It should be remarked upon. Overseas, supporters of both Hamas and far-right Israeli settlers would have both applauded Peter Dutton and Adam Band, Marine Faruqi and David Littleproud, all being on the same page on undermining bipartisanship. It is an important national asset, and that vote, more than anything else, showed that they are not fit for government.